For my lesson plan, I'm doing third grade math with fractions and teaching them how to tell when they're equal and how to add and subtract. And so the Common Core standard for third grade students is they should be able to identify fractions on a number line and be able to explain and compare the equivalent fractions. Okay, so for student materials, I have a mini whiteboard, expo marker, a number line, and then their student tablet, so then they can pull up the applications that I have for their technologies, which I'll explain later. And then for teacher materials, I have the whiteboard, expo markers, and then YouTube, because I thought I could incorporate some YouTube videos to help explain to the students more about the fractions in detail. And so for the bell ringer, I'm going to show them a number line with fractions marked on it, and then I'm going to ask them what the numbers and the lines represent, just to make sure that they know like that the big hash marks are whole numbers, and then the little hash marks are like spaces in between, which would be the fractions. And then I'll ask them if they already know anything about fractions that they've maybe have learned in previous years, and whether or not they have an example like a pizza would be like one slice would be 1/8, and stuff like that. And then for the framework, the focused instruction, I would explain how a number line can be used to represent fractions. Use the whiteboard in my classroom to draw a number line from 0 to 1 and then divide between equal parts. And then I'll use a YouTube video to show a video explaining how to identify fractions on a number line, to just touch on things that I might have forgotten in the lesson. And then I'll define equivalent fractions. And then I will use a whiteboard to demonstrate how to find equivalent fractions by multiplying or dividing with the numerator and denominator to get equal. So then the denominator will be equal because that's the only way you can divide fractions. And explain the correct answer and provide a detailed explanation of why it's the correct equivalent fraction when I have them do it on their own. So for guided instruction, I'm going to ask students to identify fractions represented by different points on the number line. And that's when I'll explain to them whether they were right or wrong, or how they're right about one thing, but that could not always be applied to a different thing. And then for collaborative learning, I would provide a few examples and ask students to list equivalent fraction examples like 1/4 or 1/2 is equal to 2/4, and then 1/2 is also equal to 3/6. And then I would conduct a poll asking students to choose the correct equivalent fraction for a given fraction with options provided in the poll. And then for independent practice, I would allow students to annotate the number line on their screen to practice identifying fractions. And then I also have one of the technologies, which is IXL, which is an app that you get on your student tablet or your phone or your iPad. And then each student can work individually, and I'll go more into detail about that in a little bit. And then for differentiation, IXL builds on the concepts that students have already learned or previously learned, maybe in another lesson or something that they most likely have learned in second grade, and it just builds on that. So that's also good for higher level students, so then they don't feel like it's more challenging. So when I'm working with students that aren't as high on that level, they're still getting their needs met and they're still being challenged. And then while students are working on IXL or slice fractions, which is another technology I'll go into later, or just the math problems I assigned like homework, I will call each student up to my desk and ask them what they might need help on, what they feel okay on, just so I can help them with their specific need for the lesson. And then for collaboration, this is where I would introduce Matific, which is a teacher technology that I would use. It uses trial and error methods and games, which I would project onto the whiteboard or the smartboard. And I would have the students like give suggestions on how to maybe solve the game, and then they could bounce ideas off each other to help solve the level, which would be good. And then for formative assessment, at this point, I would distribute a quiz on fractions to the students. And then I would create multiple choice questions that assess their understanding of identifying fractions on a number line and equivalent fractions. And then once they finish the quiz, I would go over the questions with them and provide explanations for things they might have gotten wrong and just other things that they might be confused on. So student technology tool number 1 is IXL, which asks students questions based on your grade level. And I have used IXL in the past, and I did find it helpful. So basically you get, the teacher can set like a certain goal. You get to like 86% right, 90% right. And as you get questions right, it gives you a certain amount of points. But if you get a question wrong, it like deducts points. So you're still mastering. And once you get to that level, it's considered mastered. So it really helps students get like a good grasp on the concept. Okay, and then when a student answers wrong, IXL also, it shows them what part they got wrong and like shows them steps to like make sure they get it right, and shows them what to do, and just makes sure that they understand what they're doing. And student technology number 2 is Slice Fractions, which is an app that you would download on I think their student iPad or their iPhone. And it just reinforces fraction concepts. And students can share devices once they've reached all levels, which is great for collaboration, like for collaborative learning. And they can work in small groups they can either pass the tablet around and like take turns, or they can get in small groups and help each other work on a certain level and beat the level. And it includes a teacher's guide with summaries that has the learning objectives of each game, which is super helpful for teachers because then you know that the students are actually learning something and what they should know by the end of it. And my teacher technology tool is Matific. It uses games like that have trial and error to teach students fractions, and it could be used as a collaborative game, like if I were to project it on the board and have this like call on each student, and then they'd be able to bounce ideas off each other like I mentioned earlier. And teachers are able to keep track of student progress and see where each student needs improvement, which is super nice because then you can make sure each student's needs are being met. And so for the reflection at the end of the lesson, I would summarize the key concepts covered in the lesson, and then I would hand out their exit ticket, which would be a quiz with about 4 questions related to identifying fractions on a number line and finding equivalent fractions. And then after that, I would also pass out a want to know learned, or a KWL, and that's just a worksheet to see where each student is at the end of the lesson, whether it's like what they already knew, what they still don't know but they want to know, and what they learned that day. And then I'll collect the exit tickets at the end for the formative assessment purposes. Yeah, and that is my lesson plan.